My mother cheated with my uncle after my dad passed and gave me up for adoption, but I turned the table with a move that left her collapsing. When I was 7 years old, my biological mother, whom I'll refer to as Julia, gave me up for adoption the day after my biological father's death. I was fortunate to be adopted by a loving family, whom I now call Mom and Dad. Julia recently reached out to me, a 17-year-old girl, after 10 years of no contact. For clarity, I'll refer to my biological mother as Julia and my adoptive parents as Mom and Dad when describing what happened. At the age of 20, Julia gave birth to me with my biological father. I was the reason she had to leave college. They married shortly after my biological father's graduation from school. When I was about 3 years old, he was diagnosed with leukemia and passed away shortly after my 7th birthday. The day after his death, Julia placed me for adoption, and I moved in with my new family. I suppose the process of relinquishing custody had begun long before his death. Even though 10 years have passed, I can still recall everything as clearly as if it were yesterday. I was angry and confused by what was happening. Many people assured me that I would be all right, that my father was in a better place, but all I wanted was to see him. Despite his illness, he was always available when I wanted to visit him. After his death, I wasn't even permitted to say goodbye. When my new family arrived the day after my father's death, I had hardly had time to process everything. Julia told me these people would look after me for a few days, but those days quickly turned into weeks, months, and years. I kept waiting for her to get in touch. At first, I cried a lot because I felt like my mother and family had deserted me. A few weeks after my adoptive parents took me in, my biological grandparents visited me, and they have remained in contact ever since. When I was about 14, I was old enough to ask questions, as I was well aware I was adopted. I simply wanted to know what had happened with Julia. I clearly recall getting along with my birth parents when I was younger, so I was curious about why all of this had occurred. Eventually, I learned the truth from my adoptive parents and grandparents. It seems Julia was distraught to learn that my biological father had leukemia. Instead of supporting him, she began an affair with my uncle. While that was terrible in itself, no one was aware of it until 6 months before my father's passing. By then, my father's health had begun to deteriorate significantly, and Julia wanted to be with my uncle as soon as my father was gone. They decided there was no use in hiding their romance any longer. My uncle and Julia discussed it with their parents, who were clearly revolted but remained silent out of concern for my ailing father. They didn't want him, already dealing with so much, to learn about the affair. I was too young to comprehend. Julia and my uncle also declared that they didn't want to raise me and were considering placing me for adoption around the same time they told my grandparents about the affair. Despite all the commotion, Julia was clear about what she wanted. She claimed she didn't even want to be a mother and had been far too young when she gave birth to me. She said her parents' urging to keep me and marry my father was the only reason she felt ready at the time. Without their pressure, her life would have been different, and she probably wouldn't have done either of those things. She didn't want me and decided to place me for adoption since my father would no longer be involved. They waited until my father died, as they couldn't send me away while he was still alive. Then they gave my adoptive parents permission to take me in. My situation astonished even my adoptive parents, who were only interested in adopting a child to complete their family because they had trouble conceiving again after their first pregnancy. It was too risky for my mom to carry another child. They hadn't heard about me through adoption agencies, though I know they likely wanted a younger child. It was one of my mom's cousins, who was formerly acquainted with Julia, who informed them of my predicament. They realized they had to get me out as soon as they learned about me. They spoke to Julia face to face without agency involvement and didn't care about my age. Julia was having trouble finding a willing adopter for a 7-year-old through an agency, so she consented to let them adopt me. 4 months before my father's death, they had a conversation with Julia, and everything was settled a few weeks before his passing. Even my adoptive parents assumed I would stay with Julia for a few days after my father's death, but she sent me away the very next day. I was relieved to learn that Julia had chosen to place me for adoption after discovering the truth. People typically choose younger children when adopting, so I was fortunate to find such amazing parents. I discovered a truly wonderful family, and I couldn't be happier. I adore my parents and older brother, and with 4 sets of grandparents, you can only imagine how pampered I've been. After my father died, no one stayed in contact with Julia or my uncle. My grandparents planned his funeral, but Julia and my uncle weren't even present. I wasn't there either, as my adoptive parents believed it would be best for me to adjust to my new life during such a confusing time. I expected to feel unwelcome or sad after learning the truth about why I was placed for adoption and why Julia had left my life. However, I was primarily relieved that I had found parents who genuinely wanted me and avoided living with my biological mother. Now that I'm 17 and will be attending college in a few months, I rarely think about Julia, my uncle, or their actions. But when Julia contacted me on Instagram, asking if I'd be open to meeting and making amends, I couldn't stop thinking about them for days. It's easy to find me since I have a public account, but I didn't understand why she was contacting me after all these years. I decided to find out why she suddenly wanted to reconnect before agreeing to anything. In a lengthy and sincere message, Julia expressed regret for letting me go and choosing to focus on her life with my uncle rather than her role as a mother. Although much time had passed, she wanted me to know she wasn't entirely wrong, even though she acknowledged it wasn't her place to insist I return to her as her daughter. She claimed her only mistake was taking on too much at a young age before understanding the consequences. She was under a lot of strain, which led to poor choices. Despite what my family might have told me, Julia maintained she never regretted having me. She wanted to make amends because she simply wasn't ready to be a mother. I was intrigued, so after some thought, I agreed to meet her without telling my parents or grandparents. It wasn't until I met her that I realized she needed my assistance and wasn't just seeking to patch things up. I should have recognized it sooner, but I tend to look for the positive in everyone, including Julia. She seemed friendly and pleasant when we met for lunch 2 days ago. She tried to give her version of events, claiming her parents forced her to care for me, marry my father, and leave college. She wasn't prepared for any of it but felt pressured to conform. The news of her husband's condition was the final straw, leading her to have an affair after feeling smothered in her marriage. She claimed she didn't regret the affair because she thought my uncle was the love of her life. She's been happily married to him for 8 years and was glad to have found him. However, she broke down in tears, saying part of the reason she reached out was because their marriage was now in peril. She needed my help to reconcile with both her parents and my father's parents, who had cut her off for 10 years and wanted nothing to do with her or my uncle after she secretly placed me for adoption. In the past, Julia and my uncle were okay with this distance, but recently, my uncle began arguing with her because he wanted to reconcile with his parents. For some reason, he blamed Julia, thinking things wouldn't have turned out so badly if she hadn't given me up so quickly. Her only option, she reasoned, was to have me speak with my grandparents and persuade them to reconcile with her and my uncle to save her marriage from disintegrating. She clarified that she and my uncle had been arguing a lot recently, and this was the only solution she could think of. I regret meeting Julia more than anything else in my life. She wasn't there to apologize, explain, or make amends. She only wanted my help with her marital problems. I doubt I'd want to assist her even if I could, given how self-centered she has been. She doesn't deserve my help. I told her I couldn't be moved by her crocodile tears. As I was about to leave, she said I'd understand her predicament if I were in her shoes. She claimed she did her best to be a good mother but felt forced to become one before she was ready. She said I was no different from others if I couldn't recognize that because I'd been brainwashed by my family. That irritated me. Even though she was my mother for 6 or 7 years, she had all the support in the world. I was certain my grandparents hadn't advised her to leave college, that was her own decision. They had simply told her to keep me and see where it went without pressuring her. She took their counsel as coercion. If I had to choose who to trust, I'd choose my grandparents. I told her to find another place to sell her nonsense, as I didn't believe her. I also said she cheapened her apologies by trying to persuade me to restore her relationship without mending herself. Although I was prepared to give her a chance to be truthful, I told her I wasn't obligated to help her since we weren't dating. I may have been born to her, but my adoptive mother, not her, raised me. After that, I left the restaurant and returned home. When I got home, I discovered Julia had sent me a voice message. The background sounds indicated she was still at the restaurant. She was crying, claiming it was terrible of me to say we had no relationship. She said she was my biological mother and would always be, despite everything. She still thought of me as her daughter. I'm not sure how to respond. I no longer think of her as my mother, and I don't want to feel guilty about it. She hasn't been my mother for 10 years. Her crying makes me feel conflicted, but I can't bring myself to block her. She's a human being who once shared a bond with me, even if I don't consider her my mother. I haven't told my family about meeting Julia, though I thought it was obvious in my post. I didn't inform them in advance because I don't think they would support my choice. I wanted to make this decision on my own for now, but I know I owe it to them, and I will tell them. They all despise her, with good reason, so I knew they wouldn't have allowed me to meet her. I'm certain of that. I suppose I met her to get closure. I didn't know what to expect, but I wanted to speak with her one last time. I knew she'd apologize, but I wasn't thinking clearly since her reaching out evoked conflicting feelings. I have no regrets about meeting her, I got the closure I needed. Sometimes, you have to put everyone else aside and follow your instincts, even if they're wrong. It's your mistake, at least. I finally told my family that I met Julia. As expected, They were quite unhappy about it. Julia started sending me texts and calls, requesting I talk to her again and give her a chance to explain herself. I blocked her a few days ago after our meeting last week. I didn't know what she'd say, but I no longer wanted to find out. All I needed from her was closure, which I got after our encounter. She only wanted my help, she didn't truly want to put things right. After our altercation at the restaurant, I'm certain that's the only reason she contacted me. I knew it was time to tell my family about our meeting, as I didn't want to talk to her again. I sat down with my parents and all my grandparents today and explained everything. My parents were furious that I met her without telling them, but they seemed to understand. My grandparents were the ones most upset with me. I quietly listened to their reprimands because I deserved them. I should have consulted them first. They were most concerned that, given Julia's manipulative tendencies, she might have tried to brainwash me or paint them as the bad guys. When they finished, I explained that I met her for closure. I felt compelled to share my reasoning, even if they didn't fully grasp it. I expressed regret for doing it behind their backs, and everyone seemed appeased when I promised never to be untruthful again. We discussed Julia's motivation for contacting me and her remarks about my uncle's desire to reconcile with his parents. We agreed the matter was more complicated than she made it out to be. If she was trying to coerce me into helping her reconnect with the family, they were probably in trouble and needed assistance. Julia had been distraught on the phone and in person, saying her marriage was in peril. My grandparents thought she was likely telling the truth. We chose not to get involved, as it wasn't our place, regardless of the truth. The day Julia and my uncle declared their relationship while my father was still ill, my grandparents made it clear they no longer regarded them as family. When Julia gave me away without explanation, it was the final straw. They were fortunate my adoptive parents allowed my grandparents to stay in my life. In any case, I've blocked Julia, and I will never speak to her again, no matter what. She's been frantically trying to contact me, messaging about how her life and marriage are failing and how much she needs me. I feel bad for ignoring her, but what does she expect me to do? I couldn't persuade her in-laws or my grandparents to reconcile even if I wanted to, and I wouldn't want to if I were in their shoes. It's reasonable for me to cut contact with her now. She may try to create other accounts to reach me, but I know that won't work. If she tries again, I'll let her know I'm not interested. If she continues to annoy me, I'll report her. I overheard my grandparents discussing possible reasons for my uncle's desire to reconcile. They suggested it might be money problems. We have no idea what they've been up to since no one in the family has been in contact with them. We know they still live in the same city, but that's all. In the past, Julia was a stay-at-home mother, but who knows now? It highlights how heinous their actions are if my grandparents are correct and Julia and my uncle are trying to reconnect due to financial difficulties. Contacting a daughter they abandoned 10 years ago to reconcile with their parents for money is among the lowest things imaginable. I hope they get what they deserve if that's the case. The day had started like any other, with the familiar rhythm of school winding down and the short walk home stretching ahead of me. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves as I made my way through the quiet streets near my school. Living just a block away, I'd grown accustomed to this peaceful routine, a moment to clear my mind after a long day of classes. But today, that sense of calm was shattered in a way I hadn't anticipated. Julia, someone I'd gone to great lengths to distance myself from, reappeared in my life with a startling audacity that left me reeling. 10 days earlier, I had taken decisive action to cut all ties with her. After a falling out that had left a bitter taste, I blocked her on every platform, social media, messaging apps, everywhere. For a week, silence followed, and I naively assumed she had moved on. That assumption, however, was a mistake, one that taught me a hard lesson about the dangers of oversharing personal details online. Somehow, Julia had managed to track down my school's address, a detail I must have let slip on a public platform long ago. It was a stark reminder of how even the smallest pieces of information can be weaponized when they fall into the wrong hands. As I walked home that afternoon, lost in my thoughts, the sound of a car engine broke through my reverie. Before I could process what was happening, Julia's car pulled up beside me, tires screeching slightly as she came to a stop. Her window rolled down, and she began shouting, her voice sharp and insistent, urging me to get in. The suddenness of her appearance sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I didn't trust her, not after everything that had happened between us. Our last encounter had been a disaster, marked by her manipulative tactics and a refusal to respect boundaries. There was no way I was getting into that car. I stood my ground, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I'm not getting in, I told her, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. I warned her that if she tried to escalate things, I wouldn't hesitate to make a scene right there in the middle of the street. The threat of public attention seemed to give her pause, but only for a moment. She quickly shifted her tone, adopting a softer, almost pleading demeanor. She claimed she just wanted to talk, to clear the air after our last confrontation had gone so poorly. She insisted she wasn't there to argue or upset me, that she only wanted to make amends. She even went so far as to say she didn't care about reconciling with her parents, a point that struck me as odd given how central that issue had been in our prior disputes. Her voice carried a note of desperation, a quaver that might have swayed someone less guarded. But I wasn't moved. Instead, her words only fueled my irritation. I'd seen this act before. Her ability to feign regret was almost theatrical, a performance designed to manipulate. I wasn't falling for it again. I want nothing to do with you, I said firmly. Leave me alone. The words were clear, final, and left no room for negotiation. That's when the mask slipped. The remorseful facade vanished, replaced by the raw anger I'd come to associate with her true character. Julia's face contorted, and she unleashed a tirade, cursing at me with a venom that caught me off guard. She accused me of being ungrateful, of spurning her attempts at civility. Her words grew darker, more threatening. I tried to be courteous, she spat, but if you keep acting like this, I'll make sure you regret it. You'd better watch your back. The threat hung in the air, absurd in its melodrama but unsettling all the same. I almost laughed at the audacity. How could she possibly think she had the power to ruin my life? But the intensity in her eyes told me she believed her own words, and that was enough to send a chill down my spine. I kept walking, refusing to engage further. Julia continued to shout, her voice echoing through the quiet street as she drove alongside me for a few moments before finally speeding off, her curses fading into the distance. The encounter left me shaken but resolute. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me, no matter how unhinged she seemed. When I got home, I wasted no time telling my family what had happened. My parents, siblings, and I gathered in the living room, the atmosphere heavy with concern. We discussed the incident at length, piecing together what it meant and what we should do next. Julia's behavior wasn't just erratic, it was threatening, and we couldn't ignore the potential for escalation. After some deliberation, we reached a unanimous decision. We needed to pursue a restraining order. It was the most practical way to protect me and send a clear message that her actions wouldn't be tolerated. In the days that followed, my parents took the necessary steps to file for the restraining order. The process was straightforward but nerve-wracking, as we waited to see how Julia would respond. When she was served with the legal notice, the fallout was immediate and revealing. My uncle, Julia's husband, suddenly reached out to his parents, a move we'd long suspected was tied to their motives. As we had pieced together, their scheme was rooted in financial desperation. For years, they had been running a confectionery business, a venture that had once held promise but had since fallen into decline. The shop was bleeding money, and their attempts to stabilize it had failed. Rather than confront their financial struggles head-on, they had concocted a plan to manipulate their way back into favor with my uncle's parents, hoping to secure financial support. Julia's confrontation with me had been part of this elaborate act, a desperate bid to create leverage or sympathy. But her impatience and volatile temper had unraveled their carefully laid plans. When I refused to play along, her outburst exposed the truth. This wasn't about reconciliation or amends, it was about money, plain and simple. The realization was both infuriating and validating. I'd been right to trust my instincts, to see through her crocodile tears and stand firm. In the wake of the restraining order, Julia's behavior only grew more erratic. She took to social media, posting vitriolic rants about me and my family, oblivious to how her words were undermining her own position. Each post was a gift to our case, further evidence of her instability and hostility. My uncle, meanwhile, tried to distance himself from her actions, claiming he had no part in her schemes and positioning himself as an innocent victim. As the only son, he insisted he was entitled to his parents' financial support, a claim that rang hollow given the context of Julia's behavior. Their marriage, already strained by their failing business and clashing personalities, seemed to be teetering on the edge. Part of me couldn't help but take a grim satisfaction in the thought that this mess might push them toward divorce. It felt like a fitting consequence for their deceit. As we awaited the court's decision on the restraining order, I felt a growing sense of confidence. Julia's own actions were strengthening our case, her online tirades painting a clear picture of someone unhinged and incapable of letting go. She had made it abundantly clear that she wanted nothing to do with me, so her resistance to the restraining order was baffling. If she was so eager to wash her hands of me, why fight the legal boundaries we were putting in place? It didn't make sense, but then again, little about her behavior did. With college on the horizon, I found myself looking forward to a fresh start. The idea of leaving this drama behind as I embarked on the next chapter of my life was a relief. Julia's financial struggles made it unlikely she'd have the means to follow me to college, and even if she tried, I knew I had the unwavering support of my family. My parents, siblings, and extended relatives had rallied around me, their presence a reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. Their encouragement and practical support, helping with the restraining order, checking in on me, and keeping an eye out for any further trouble, gave me a sense of security that Julia's threats couldn't shake. Reflecting on the ordeal, I felt a mix of emotions. There was anger, of course, at Julia's audacity and the way she'd tried to manipulate me. But there was also pride in myself for recognizing her tactics early on, for standing my ground in the face of her threats, and for trusting my instincts when they told me something was off. The experience had been a harsh lesson in the importance of protecting my personal information and setting firm boundaries. It had also shown me the strength of my family's unity and the power of taking decisive action to protect myself. As the legal process moved forward, I felt a growing sense of closure. The restraining order would soon be in place, a formal barrier between me and Julia's chaos. Her threats, once so menacing, now seemed hollow, the desperate outbursts of someone grasping at straws. With college approaching and my family by my side, I knew I was ready to move on, leaving Julia and her schemes firmly in the past.